Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we got over technical difficulties here, so we'll get started right on time. The Mobile Source
Good morning.
Committee. Good
Can you
morning.
hear us? Good morning,
Yes, we
Chairman.
can. Yes, we can.
All right.
Yes, we can.
Let's get started. We're going to start off with Barbara this morning, giving us a presentation on authorized staff to submit a letter of support for CARB locomotive petition to EPA. Barbara, you ready to go?
Yes, sir, Dr. Parker. This is staff's response to an action recently taken by the California Air Resources Board. As by way of background, because new locomotives are preempted by federal law from being regulated by either CARB or the local districts. CARB's state strategy for the 2016 AQMP included a proposal that they would petition EPA for a new locomotive standard more stringent than that currently in existence. Shortly after the CARB board adopted the plan, the petition was filed on April 13th. The Bay Area District has filed a letter of support already, as has an environmental group. We note that locomotive emissions are higher than some people think. They actually amount to slightly more NOx emissions in the base year 2012 of our AQMP than the entire reclaimed universe of stationary sources of 4 tons or more. So CARB's petition is based on their staff's analysis of the technical and economic feasibility of more stringent standards. They're requesting the EPA to establish a new standard which would be referred to as Tier 5, because we already have Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tier 4 went into effect for locomotives manufactured in 2015. The standard for Tier 5 would be 0.2 grams per brake horsepower hour of NOx and less than 0.01 for PM. I have to point out that in the agenda item I had erroneously said that the standard would be 0.02 grams NOx, which would be the same standard that we were asking for the trucks. But I had misread the petition, and it's actually 0.2, which is 10 times higher. Of course, locomotive engines are much larger than truck engines. Importantly, the CARB petition also requests that for that standard, the locomotives be designed to have the capability of zero emission operation in designated areas. And in fact, that's not too difficult for most locomotives, because most locomotives are already what they call diesel electric, which means they are operating on electricity, but it's generated by a diesel engine. So if you put a car with a large battery right behind the locomotive and you have the appropriate ways of hooking them up, which takes a little bit of work, then it can run on pure electricity for as long as that battery car will last. They also requested that EPA establish standards for remanufactured locomotives. They are more stringent for the locomotives that were manufactured between 2015 and 2024 than for those manufactured before 2015. The new locomotives they're requesting to be effective 2025, which gives about 7 years lead time, which CARB staff believes is adequate. Some of the expected technologies that are described would be the use of selective catalytic reduction, diesel oxidation catalysts, onboard batteries for hybrid electric locomotives, battery and fuel cell zero emission locomotives. So there could be a variety of technologies that might meet these standards. CARB has asked EPA to respond to their petition. That doesn't mean do the rulemaking, but respond as to whether or not they will do the rulemaking by the summer of 2017. And we're asking the committee to recommend to the governing board to authorize a letter of support for the CARB petition. I did have the draft letter and board letter sent out yesterday afternoon. I apologize for the late notice on the actual letter, but we thought you would rather see it late than not see it at all. So I'm ready to answer any questions on this item.
Can you address how it compares to the San Joaquin?
Okay, well, Mr. Dastry is reminding me that the
This
San
one,
Joaquin
this
Valley AQMD has also asked EPA to adopt a new regulation for locomotives. I don't recall especially what standard they asked for, but I do recall that they asked for EPA to regulate in-use locomotives, which they cannot do under the Clean Air Act. So this petition is addressing what EPA's authority would be. I don't know if there's anyone, I don't see Matt, so.
He's in New York.
Okay.
Barbara,
Yes, Dr. Parker.
I have a question. What is the standard right now for Tier 5?
With Tier 5 is the proposed standard. Tier 4 is the standard for 2015. And I believe for NOx, it would be about a 66% reduction. The new standard would be about a 66% reduction, I recall reading that, from the existing standard.
Okay. Any further questions from any of the other board members?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may.
I probably, excuse me, Dr. Liu, I probably should acknowledge the members that are here. Is Dr. Liu and Councilman Mitchell and McCallum and Mayor Ashley. Is Supervisor Kuehl, I think that's her sitting on the end, is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Go right ahead.
Okay, we have everyone. I assume that the petition is, and maybe I shouldn't make this assumption, but for the locomotives, is it similar as to the petition we submitted for the trucks, that EPA is under an obligation to periodically review and update their emission standards?
Yes, that's actually one of the legal arguments that's made in the petition, is that they're required to adopt standards which obtain the greatest degree of emission reductions achievable through the application of technology which is available for the regulated locomotives. So that's one of the arguments.
It's in the petition itself. Okay, well, because I didn't see any legal argument that they needed to do this in the letter, which was why I was asking.
Yeah.
I also didn't see anything about, you actually have to respond to the petition in a timely manner.
That's in the CART petition. We could add something like that, but it didn't seem necessary.
I'm not thinking about what the first impression is. I'm thinking about when you get before a judge and you have to say, we told them they had to do this. So, use your judgment. I just thought it might be helpful in the future sometime if this actually ends up in litigation for some reason. Had we talked to ARB or thought about, one of the things we've been trying to do with locomotives is either encouraging or requiring them to use their cleanest locomotives in the places that need it the most. I'm not sure that that is something you can do with an emission standard, but if there were some way for us to either incentivize or require them to deploy their cleanest locomotives in the places that need it the most, we would benefit tremendously from it. So the problem we have is that these things last for a really, really long time, and the benefits that we would see from this carry it out and have even longer if they decided to deploy them elsewhere. All right.
So I think you're right. I personally haven't discussed with CARB those issues in a very long time, so maybe during the beginning part of the AQMP planning.
Yeah, I think there may defer to Barbara on the legal issues of whether EPA or the state has the authority to require something like that, but that is something we've been asking in various ways of railroads to do over the past several years. Obviously, we're working on the facility-based mobile source measures, and that'll be a topic of discussion.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any way to work this into the petition or raise it in any way, but if you figure that out, I would encourage you to do so.
If I could just add an alternative to that,
Sure.
that would delay EPA from moving forward. A standard is a fairly easy,
Straightforward thing.
straightforward issue for them to respond to. When you start dictating what's going to be used and where it's going to be
Because
used,
it's new, yeah.
it becomes much more difficult. And I would just perhaps suggest that you consider focus on the standard and then in parallel focus on the use. We actually spoke about some of the railroad applications with Congressman Calvert yesterday, who, as has been acknowledged heretofore, the district really hasn't had the ability to manage that use. We did talk about some of the funding mechanism incentives that might be a part of that. And we can give a full update, but, all this just happened
It
yesterday.
makes sense to do it under separate tracks
Yeah.
if you think, and especially on the incentive part, and I don't
Right.
think necessarily is germane to a emissions,
Yeah,
requirement.
and I'd ask Supervisor Ashley, and based on the meeting yesterday, what do you think, Supervisor?
I think the Supervisor Calvert pointed out the railroad has a lot of engines sitting around, and they're not going to go down easy. And I think we need to move ahead on this, but we also got to work on the side to follow Dr. Liu's suggestion to try to get them to use the cleaner engines where they're needed the most. For example, right through my district, the 65 trains or more a day chug right through the Cajon Pass, right through the Riverside County, up through the San Antonio Pass, and the ones that don't there go through San Bernardino up the Cajon Pass. And we need to do something about that. Those things are, they're going slow. These are huge trains and multiple engines. And I know there's at least 65 of them because a constituent called me and counted them one day because they were trying to get something mixed. And you pointed out where these emissions are from these trains are as much as the 12% that we can control. This is huge. We gotta push the pedal on this, but still be ready to work in a practical way, later on.
Dr. Parker?
Yes, go right ahead.
My only concern is that, I'm on the Metrolink board and we're getting 40 Tier 4 engines being delivered right now. None of them are in service right now. Most of that is funded by Carl Moyer funds. If
Yeah.
we're now going to require us to replace all of those at some point in the next 8 or 10 years, that gets to be a problem.
This is just for new purchases, yeah.
Yes, Mayor McCallum, there is a standard that is being proposed for remanufactured locomotives, but there's not a requirement that the locomotive be remanufactured at any particular time. So the engine can be operated until the operator feels it needs to be remanufactured, at which point this new standard would kick in.
Dr. Parker?
So we need incentives.
Dr. Parker, I do have a question.
Go right ahead.
Are any other states joining in with California to request this?
Now, that's a good question, and I haven't inquired of CARB whether that's the case, so we'll certainly do that. And if they want our help in obtaining other states' support, we'll certainly be happy to do that.
Dr. Parker?
Go ahead.
I was just going to move the staff recommendation on this.
Second.
Okay, any further questions?
I don't know if we had
Then-
any public comment on this item, but we didn't ask. Is there any public comments? Okay, no public comments.
All right, roll call.
Okay, Supervisor Ashley,
Yes.
Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes?
Councilwoman Mitchell,
Yes.
Supervisor Kuehl,
Yes.
Dr. Parker.
Yes.
Motion
All right,
passes.
thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
We'll go on to our informational items then. And Ken McMillan on facility-based mobile source measures update.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian McMillan. I'm the Planning and Rules Manager here at the district. I wanted to provide a brief progress report on our facility-based mobile source measures. As you all know, our AQMP was approved in March of 2017, both by our governing board here and by the CARB board as well later in the month. This AQMP described the path forward. to get to our key attainment dates of 2023 and 2031. And that included a variety of parallel efforts, including control measures from AQMD, CARB's mobile source state strategy, incentives, financial and otherwise, and potential legislation. And these are our parallel efforts that are all going on. What I want to talk a little bit more about today are some of these control measures that were described in the AQMP. On this next slide, there are 15 mobile source measures that were described in the AQMP. They are categorized into 5 broad categories. 2 of those, the top 2, emissions growth management and facility-based, are really looking more at specific facilities. The next 2, on-road and off-road, look specifically at vehicles, and then the last category looks at incentives. From these categories, there are 5 specific measures on facility-based, are called facility-based mobile source measures, and these were the focus of working groups that were described in the AQMP. These are specifically for new development and redevelopment projects, and that's residential, commercial, and industrial uses, at least those uses that don't fall into any of the other categories here. We have the ports, rail yards, warehouses, and commercial airports. One thing that has been discussed both in the AQMP process as well as with these working groups is, first and foremost, we want to do this as a collaborative process. There are a lot of stakeholders with a lot of different needs and different ideas, and we need to be working with everybody as part of this. I've also heard that there's a real strong desire, certainly from industry, to seek voluntary measures wherever possible, and we want to pursue that and see where that goes. Of course, we're going to be coordinating with other agencies who have jurisdiction, both CARB and EPA. One of the key things we need to do, though, is to make sure we're making progress. And so how do we assess that progress? And we're actively working on that. Because ultimately, we need to provide a recommendation here to the board in March, a staff recommendation about how this process is working and what do we think should be done moving forward. And that could potentially mean moving to more of a formal rulemaking approach, and that can take a lot of different forms that we haven't really pre-decided yet by any means. There were 3 specific amendments at the approval, the governing board approval of the AQMP that related to mobile source measures. I just want to very briefly summarize them here. One was on commercial airports, and we were directed as staff to undertake a stakeholder process and draft for the board's consideration by February of 2019 an indirect source rule for non-aircraft sources at commercial airports. That process is very, very similar to what we're undergoing with all the other working groups right now, and it's going to be happening in parallel of gathering information, working with stakeholders, and coming up with potential approaches. So we're working on that in parallel.
And does that include all of the airports in the air district?
It would be all commercial airports in the air district, yes.
Right, including cargo.
Yes.
Excluding aircraft.
I understand that.
Okay.
But I'm just concerned that we have a lot of airports other than LA Airport
Sure.
that need to be included.
Absolutely.
There are 3 or 4 in my area that need to be included. So
Yes, that's a very good point, and the kinds of sources and the emission sources at each of those airports certainly is going to be different. Yes, we're well aware.
and a much different impact to the smaller airports than somewhere like LA.
Yes. Okay. The 2 other measures that didn't necessarily deal with facility-based mobile sources, but will have an impact on our process. One, there was an existing measure, or a couple of measures for MOB 7 and 8 that deal with on-road heavy-duty vehicles. The existing measure in the AQMP that was brought before board was to seek legislative authority to accelerate purchase and use of zero-emission vehicles in public fleets, and there was an amendment to include also near-zero emission vehicles as part of that. If we're granted that authority, then we will seek to amend our fleet rules within 2 years. And lastly, on the heavy-duty vehicle incentives, we were directed to place priority on the most cost-effective technologies. Similarly, at the CARB board approval of the AQMP, there were a number of resolutions that were brought forward as part of that approval. One of the most important ones is right up front is the state strategy was approved. That is identified in the AQMP. There's also regular progress reports that CARB staff has to bring back on that strategy, as well as reporting on metrics for assessing progress. There's been some considerable discussion and maybe a little bit of confusion about some of the remaining 3 bullets here about what CARB approved. So first, when it comes to facility-based measures, CARB staff was directed to come back within 1 year on concepts for an indirect source rule and any alternatives to control pollution from large freight facilities, such as the ones that are outlined in our facility-based measures. Secondly, within 18 months, CARB staff was directed to develop an at-birth regulation amendment to achieve up to 100% compliance by 2030 for LA ports and any other ports in the state that are in or adjacent to the top 10% of CalEnviro screen areas. And similarly, develop cargo handling equipment regulations to achieve 100% ZEV by 2030 for the same criteria on the CalEnviro screen. We've also been working or regularly communicating with CARB staff to make sure that we're aware of the progress that they're making and how they're going to be working through this for themselves.
Question, wasn't the last item up to 100% also instead of achieve 100%? I can't remember. Remember, Judy?
I don't. Yes, I think it was up to.
It was up to 100%.
Okay.
Up to 100%.
Yeah. Makes a difference.
It does make
In
a
other words,
difference.
not beyond 100%.
We all give 110% around here, so. There was a schedule that was outlined in the AQMP for how to move forward with the facility-based measures and the working groups for these facility-based measures. The first 2 here are convening the working group and then this progress report to the Mobile Source Committee today. We're a little bit behind on that. We were gearing up for getting ready for this process, but it's full steam ahead at this point. We are planning to have ongoing meetings with the working groups. We actually have scheduled our first individual working group meetings for May 31st and June 1st. So we're definitely moving forward quickly here. We will be coming back to this committee in October to report on progress to date. But ultimately, we're going to be coming back by March to the full governing board with recommendations again on how this process has worked for the past year and what we think is an appropriate path forward. Now we know as we go through this, there are 2 key considerations that will underline almost everything we do in these working groups. First and foremost, we know that if we don't have successful outcomes with this, that air quality and public health will suffer. And that is something that I don't think anybody desires to have as an outcome. Secondly, we know that there are some significant economic considerations so that depending on how this process goes, it can have different kinds of effects on the economy, on jobs, on businesses, et cetera. We know that these 2 also interact with each other. So improved public health and improved air quality has an economic impact. Same way that if it's poor air quality and public health, it has an economic impact that way. And similarly, if the economy suffers, that can also have public health impacts. So these 2 interact with each other, and we don't really see these as opposing. You can have improved air quality and public health and improved economy, and that's what we're striving for in this process. We had our first introductory working group meeting on May 8th, where we gathered all of the working groups together in the auditorium via webcast, conference call, et cetera, and we wanted to just lay out what we see as the process moving forward. We walked through the objectives, process, and schedule. So just very briefly, the objectives that were proposed was obviously to work with the stakeholders on each of these measures, to identify voluntary measures that are cost effective, to consider how other AQMP measures, whether it's incentives or other regulations, will interact with these facility-based measures. We need to identify metrics for progress. How do we know if we're being successful? And ultimately, we need to develop mechanisms to ensure that any reductions that come out of this are real, enforceable, et cetera, and ultimately creditable towards the state implementation plan. We did propose a process for how to move forward. We originally proposed to take these 5 facility-based measures and split those into 4 working groups, combining ports and rail yards. We did receive some feedback that there's pluses and minuses to putting the ports and rail yards together. We've decided for now to separate those, so we'll have 5 different working groups, but if there are opportunities to have joint meetings that make sense, we'll do that. We are expecting to have multiple meetings of each of these groups over the coming year, and also, obviously, we're available for individual meetings. A number of topics were discussed, or potential topics for future meetings. Obviously, there's a lot of emerging technologies, both on the zero emission side and near zero emission side, and those differ between off-road, on-road, ships, locos, etc. And so we'll be discussing a little bit of that in these working groups. We do need to get into what are some potential voluntary actions, projects, etc., that can achieve these emission reductions. We need to walk through how to get SIP credit, especially if something is voluntary. What does it take to make sure the voluntary measure actually works for our needs? We have a parallel process that we're working on obtaining funding and obtaining incentives. That is separate from this working group process, though. This is focused more on implementation and how do we actually get to what we all are desiring as far as air quality benefits. But we know we're going to have to report back to these groups on what is the status of obtaining those incentives. And so that's a separate parallel effort, but it certainly interacts with what we're doing with these working groups. We also know that we need to discuss some potential regulatory concepts. If it looks like there aren't sufficient voluntary measures, how can regulation fill in the gaps that might show up there? And we're soliciting input from others for other potential topics. This first meeting was a little different than a typical working group meeting. It was more of a town hall style with a formal presentation at a podium, and then speakers came up at the end and provided their comments. We don't anticipate future meetings to be like that, more of an interactive dialogue, typical of most working groups here. We thought for this first meeting, because it was so many people, it was a lot of really introductory information, we would hold it in that way. Moving forward, we'll make sure that there is also conference call capability, so if people are interested, they can listen and attend remotely. Our goal is also to provide information ahead of time so that people can take a look and come with some preliminary thoughts forms as they come to these working group meetings where we have a goal of 72 hours ahead of time. Brief summary of this first meeting. We had about 50 to 60 people in attendance, another roughly 60 plus attended by a webcast and conference call, total about 120 people listened. I don't think we've gone to check back and see the webcast is also available to see how many people keep clicking on the link. A wide variety of stakeholders, as you can imagine, and all the information is available online at that link. This webpage is still a little bit of bare bones, but we're working on beefing that up. We received a number of comments. First and foremost, we heard that some stakeholders really appreciate a collaborative process, and they're looking forward to doing that. We did hear that some would like some outreach to local governments and communities, and that can take a lot of different forms. For example, maybe holding meetings at times and locations, not just here at the district during business hours, but doing remote meetings where appropriate. Talking about metrics, not just looking at metrics of progress and moving forward, but also what are some metrics to ensure that we're engaging the community appropriately and engaging stakeholders appropriately. We did hear some feedback about having a robust web presence so that people can participate not just in a working group meeting, but in other formats via web. So we're working on that. We did hear that people want to hear about incentives, obviously, want to hear about how we're coordinating with other agencies. We did hear a preference for voluntary actions and building on existing programs, in particular with the Clean Air Action Plan at the ports. One comment that we got was there is some desire to have some goals for emission reductions for specific source categories. We were encouraged to seek legislative action to find incentives, and we're obviously working on that. Speaking of legislation, SB1 was obviously recently passed. People want to hear some more about SB1 and how does that play into what we're going to be doing as part of this effort. And we also heard a comment about encouraging a broad-based approach. Right now we have measures for warehouses, rail yards, ports, commercial airports, and new and redevelopment. But there are other kinds of land uses such as quarries and fuel depots that have a lot of truck traffic, and we're encouraged to also look at those kinds of facilities. Finally, on the next steps, again, we're beginning these first individual meetings here just in a couple weeks. We'll have those 5 meetings on May 31st and June 1st. On May 31st, it will be commercial airports and new and redevelopment, and then ports, rail yards, and warehouses on the 1st. And we will continue to meet with individual stakeholders and keep moving with this process and report back in October. That'll end my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any questions by Ian?
Yes, Dr. Parker?
Go right
if I may
ahead,
ask a question?
Supervisor.
Thank you.
Go right ahead.
I think that in many ways, the concerns of industry and the concerns of this board are contiguous in terms of what would trigger the rulemaking process. That is what, you talk about metrics, talk about measurement, talk about goals, talk about voluntary plans, and then there's some concept that if they don't achieve either the goals that have been set or some reduction, however it's developed in terms of the metrics, that, as you said, the question of moving to formal rulemaking. But there needs to be a little more specificity in terms of what triggers it. What is a failure of the voluntary approach? Because it needs to be predictable. And I think it would be good as we go through and look at these measures, because it takes a while to do formal rulemaking. And that means that the failure will sit there for quite a while we do it. So from my point of view, I think it's necessary to really say this could be an outcome of this particular failure to meet a goal in a specific amount of time that's agreed on. Because I think saying, let us try to achieve these reductions by voluntary measures, and that's sort of it, would be kind of a forever process, and there would never be any trigger because we would always be trying. So I think that specificity is necessary.
So I think that's one thing we want to achieve with the working groups early on is, like, we're going to focus on the technology that's available and see what realistic goals actually are and the timing of that, look at cost and all of those impacts, and hopefully early on we can develop those goals, develop the metrics towards working towards those goals, and be able to report back, even in the 6-month report back to this committee. We should have those more or less, I'm not going to say there's going to be a wide agreement on those goals, but at least we can report back on what we've set up in terms of metrics and goals, and then we'll already be a long ways towards those other issues about what the rule would look like, what the measures would look like if they're voluntary or otherwise.
And I think part of that encompasses a detailed listing of all the objectives for each point. So, not just developing goals, but also looking at their agreed inventories, their agreed mechanism by which we're going to look at this, and as Dr. Pine said, by what technology. So we can put together that roadmap of the objectives and the calendar timeline, and that'll provide greater certainty and recognize that it'll be dynamic. There'll be issues that'll be identified that we can incorporate into that, but at least it'll provide a much greater level of certainty for all of us.
And there's an aspect to this we also have to address early on, which is a lot of the equipment at all these facilities are regulated by CARB, by EPA, by us, and we need to really identify, what the current regulatory environment is for that equipment, what has been proposed in the AQMP and the SIP strategy, and see how that plays in. You may find out that just with implementation of the AQMP in other areas, that these facility-based measures can still achieve emission reductions, but what's left that's not regulated in other ways or may be a little bit smaller. So the goal for that category may be a little less because of all these other things that are happening in parallel. So one of our initial efforts is to lay out that regulatory landscape for all the types of sources that are at these facilities.
Great.
Right.
So Dr. Parker,
Yes, go right ahead.
I know when the reports committee met, one thing that we were requesting of the reports in the cleaner action plan was we wanted to see benchmarks, we wanted to see actual targets against which we would be able to measure reductions. So I don't know how feasible that is within this whole plan, but I just want to mention that was one of the things that we asked for. And they're developing that plan right now. They haven't come out with their final yet, I don't believe, but I think that message was directed to them, so let's
We
work
haven't
with
even
them
come
to
out with a
see.
draft yet, but if they're working on
The
a
draft,
draft.
well,
and then-
A second draft then, because.
No, the
we've
first
seen
one was
draft.
called concepts.
Oh, so it wasn't really a draft.
It wasn't really a draft.
Okay. But, so, I think we should be continuing to
Discussion
work pretty
draft. The
closely
first one
with
was a
them.
discussion draft, that's what they called it.
Yeah.
Dr. Fine just reminded me that we're meeting with them today at 1:30,
That's right.
and that's part of what we wanted to talk about with them.
Okay, thank you.
You know, one of the things that I've often, and I hear constantly when I go around to various meetings, that many of the constituents that we represent really don't have a full understanding to the extent that we do not have the regulatory power to control the major sources itself of pollution, global sources. Therefore, I would suggest that part of our presentation when we're going out to the various different communities have some kind of ratio that we can state that the basis itself of our regulatory power that we're trying to achieve will only basically be in the areas of whatever, 10%, 20%, or 30% for our local region. And the rest of it is in the hands of that of CARP and also the federal EPA. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because oftentimes when we hear people come before us and speak at public comments on various different rules, I get the impression oftentimes they don't really understand that we don't have the right itself to say eliminate all of the, the emissions, pollutant that is coming from these mobile sources. We just finished the situation itself talking about trains. And as Ashley had basically stated, that he was told that the locomotive region is not going to go down easy. Is that, and many of them are going to be fighting back on these particular areas. Sometimes, so, you're talking about having community meetings, and that's the input that I would have, to say that we should really kind of proportionally get people to understand that we're going to basically, we can only go so far on mobile sources, and then we have to stop at the door, or outside the door before we get into the door, wherever that area of space really is. But we're doing those things, and that would basically be very helpful.
Dr. Parker.
Further comments?
You're coming in and out, Dr. Parker. I don't know, we're losing some of your audio.
Well, we don't have any audio here because it's only Paul and I, and he's sitting over in the corner. I think we've had some difficulties, technical difficulties really here, but I'm sorry that my comments weren't heard, and I think that the basic issue is what I'm saying is that when we go out to the communities, I think we should really kind of quantify what our regulatory authority itself is for mobile sources, and not give people false hope that we can just come in and make rules that's going to shut everybody down and do everything, et cetera, to clean the air, almost instantaneously. Certainly, we have a lot of people who are very, very knowledgeable about this and know it, but many of the community people aren't aware of that. When I talk to people, they don't even know that we don't have the authority to basically control cars, trucks, directly. We could do them indirectly and to some extent when they're idling, all of these other kinds of things, but not otherwise. I don't know where that noise is coming from. I'm hearing it also on this end, but It's,
It's
any
better
further
now.
comments?
Yeah, well, Dr. Parker?
Yes, sir.
And the committee, I think you're absolutely right there. You said, the meetings I go to, they assume that we already have command and control of all these mobile sources, and we don't. And we have to make sure, explain to them that we're working, with a very constrained situation, and we're using incentives and the powers we have, trying to improve this. And no one else has really seemed to like to do anything about trying to improve this more than we are, so we have to keep trying. So it's very, very, very important to all of Southern California, and particularly when we get down to, the warehousing and the trains are really a big deal here, and we have to and they just think we can snap our finger and take care of this, and we can't. We have to really work through various means, and I think you hit it right on the head.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Ashley. Any further comments by any of my other colleagues?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would just say that I support what Supervisor Kuehl said. I think that would be very helpful to have those criteria and know where we're heading and what we should expect and what everyone should expect. I'd like to tell staff I think they're off to a good start. This is a Herculean task, obviously very complicated, a lot of substance, big issues, but very important, and I'm glad you're approaching it with enthusiasm and a bit of thought, and I wish you luck. I'm glad I don't have to go to the work group meetings. I think we have maybe some public comments. Yes, no? Drive all the way out here for nothing, Tom?
That was it.
David, no, okay, maybe not.
Okay, well, no further comments. We'll move along to item 3. Carol Gomez on Rule 2202 on road motor vehicle mitigation options annual update for 2016.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So this morning, I'm going to give an update on 2202. Some of you are more familiar with it than potentially others, so let's see, where am I? As background, 2202 applies to work sites with 250 or more at a site. We have over 1,300 work sites in this world. The emissions that we target are VOC, NOx, and CO, and they're to obtain emission reductions equivalent to worksite emission targets. What we do is we divide the region up geographically. So for downtown LA, they have a 1.75 average vehicle ridership target. The Inland Empire, for the most part, is a 1.3, and the rest of the region's a 1.5. There's 3 compliance options that work sites have that they choose. They choose one. The top one, the Employee Commute Reduction Program, better known as a rideshare program. They have to develop and implement different trip reduction strategies. If they choose that option, they also have to do an annual survey to determine how their employees are getting to work, and they have to have a certified employee transportation coordinator. The second one, the Air Quality Investment Program, the work sites pay a fee to the district. We in turn give that over to our STA division, and they use it to fund different mobile emission reduction programs. And then the last one, the emission reduction strategies, that one is one in which employers will purchase emission credits through credit vendors. They turn them into us, and then we retire them. So they can't be used for anything else. This slide for 2016 shows the breakdown. For the emission credits, 56% of our work sites were choosing that option, 35% the rideshare program, and 9% the air quality investment program. If you look at it though, broken out by employees, it's similar, but a little different. The credits is 53%, rideshare 45%, and AQUIP 2%. When you look at the breakdown by counties for the 3 different options, this shows who's doing what. For the top one, the Employee Commute Reduction Program, and the second one, the Air Quality Investment Program, across the board, all 4 counties, those percentages increased from the prior year. The last one, the credits, in all 4 counties, it decreased. This slide right here is kind of interesting. This program started back in 1988 under a rule called Regulation 15. And it's had several changes over the years. When it first started in 88 until 1995, it was just a rideshare program. And then because of some legislation that happened at that time frame, we then split it where we included the different options that employers would have. So if you look at the AVR, and region-wide, we try to go for the 1.5, that's the average. You could see that it's, once we did the split, the blue line shows the AVR if you look at all the options combined. So it has gone up, but with the exception of this last year, it's been more or less kind of the same for the last few years. And then if you look at the ECRP, the red line, that's the rideshare one, it's slightly a little bit more up and down, but more or less the same. In this last year, there has been a little uptick. It's in the hundreds though. For the total, the blue line, for example, in 2015, it was a 1.42, or now it's 1.44. So the change has been in the hundreds, but at least it's up. Okay, for our emission reductions for this rule, this breaks down by program and by pollutant, how many tons a day we're getting. When you look at that very bottom row, the target, that's a target we assign to ourselves. It's not a legal target. But what that reflects is if all the work sites were meeting their AVR target, how much emission reductions would we obtain? So if you look at the line above that, that shows total achieved, we're actually exceeding it, which is always great. I mean, that's our goal. And the reason that that happens is because in our AQUIP program, even though a smaller percentage of employees are doing that, TAO, when they get those funds, they have always been able to fund projects that obtain more emissions than what the target was. So that has traditionally always put us over our target. There's a compliance element of this rule. In 2016, we had 62 audits, 31 notices to comply, and of the 4 notices of violation, all 4 of those were for failure to submit a plan. So 2 work sites in LA and 2 in Orange County. All right, so we do get some additional benefits. This very top one is the one that I personally find the most interesting. Back in 2014, well, let me back up a second. For the ECRP, the rideshare program, if you're not meeting your AVR target, you have to submit a number of strategies to show that that's what you're doing to try to get your employees to rideshare. And one of the things we added back then was the installation of EV chargers. You know, because of course we want to encourage that. We want people to carpool in EVs. And so since doing that, we've been tracking that data. And we've had 65 work sites submit plans with EV chargers. And that's for a total of 671 chargers. Of those 65 work sites, 57% of those are from private employers, which I think is really good news. And then 43% from public. For the ECRP, it's also reducing 68,000 daily vehicle trips. For AQUIP, with the monies from this program, they've funded the leaf blower and lawnmower exchange program, which has come to your committees at different times for approval. They funded a CNG sweeper replacement and a heavy-duty truck replacement. And then the emission credits, the credits are coming from vehicle scrapping programs and from ERCs. Now going forward, and we'd be interested in any comments that you may have on this, there are challenges with this program. Kind of a big one is that emissions are decreasing as cars get cleaner, from this program. And that the ECRP program itself is labor intensive, both for our staff to administer, to go through the plans and stuff. So both for our staff and for the regulated community. So we are considering some rule amendments. We'd like to come up with some more streamlining of the existing programs, something to work on maximizing the emission reductions and to focus the resources on more cost-effective projects. And then if you have any comments on that, we would be very interested. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Carol. Carol, I have a question, and I had asked someone about this before. We pay money to people to scrap cars and then give them up to $10,000 or $12,000 to buy a new car. Why can't we pay people a few $100s just to scrap cars? And it seems to me that we would get a bigger bang for our buck if we took, instead of saying we're going to give out $8,000 or $9,000 to $10,000 only. I'm not saying that we don't do that. But why can't we say, if you're bringing in an old car, an old diesel car, or whatever it may, a truck, we'll pay you $200 or $300 for just taking it off of the road. That's what we do anyway, but we actually have them to do exchanges. And I understand that we don't do that. Is there any reason why we can't do that? Well, that wouldn't make sense, that if we took $1,000, we could probably get 5 or 6 or 7 cars out. Right now, if we take 5 or 6 cars off the road, we have to spend out $25,000 to $30,000 or $40,000 for people buying other near zero emission cars. We still, and just to get those cars out, or those trucks out off the road.
Dr. Parker, we actually have a scrapping program, and we're trying to see if we have.
Well, I was told that we didn't.
Well, I think it's, again, the staff that runs that program isn't here today, so and Matt is stuck in New York. So,
But the funding for that doesn't come out of our pocket, it
No.
comes from the state.
yeah, and part of it's driven by the generation of credits, which can be used for programs like this. So that's how those are run. But yeah, there are programs to scrap your old vehicle, and I think it's more than a couple hundred. I think it's up to
$1,500.
1,500 now.
And without them having to trade in a new car?
Without
To
having
buy a new car?
Yes.
Yeah,
Just turning in old cars.
yes.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
But if you
and this
keep
is a very interesting, I find it's very interesting. I'm a governing board member, and I ask a question of that nature, and the answer that I get back is that, no, we don't do it. That really is not the kind of information. Now, I think I'm very clear. Sometimes some people say I'm very verbose, and I talk a little bit too much, but I ask a very clear question. I was giving a talk just 2 weeks ago. Some people said that they had cars that they could just turn in. I'm saying, well, I asked, could we do that? And who should we go to? So we don't do that.
Dr. Parker, maybe you and I can
I think we should really make sure that we don't give that kind of information itself out if it's not correct.
It could have been that it was an incomplete answer in terms of, we don't do that, but it is done. And there's a state program, so, I mean, sometimes there's a lack of precision, not in your question, and sometimes in an answer, that's given. No critique meant, but.
There is a state program, but we work with the state to
Right.
administer that
Right.
program.
Right.
And you've probably heard of the Plus Up program, Dr. Parker. We've talked about that at some of our meetings. And that was a program
Yes.
where you can scrap your old car. You always could do that, and you get $1,500 back. But the program was then enhanced by allowing that when you scrap your old car and you buy a cleaner car, a plug-in EV, or just a car that has a lot better emissions, you get additional monies depending on your income level.
And the type of vehicle.
And the type of vehicle, yes, and in some cases, I think when we looked at this last year, you could get as much as $9,500.
Free cars. Yeah, no, Nissan Leafs, they got them for free.
use.
Sorry,
Used. Yeah.
used, okay, and I haven't done it yet.
No, I mean, there were some of them that were going for like $9,000, and they got $9,500 in credit, in incentives, so they paid for the whole car.
And the idea of that was to get these cars into disadvantaged communities, because there's the income levels that you have to meet to get those extra funds. And that is done through California Resources Board, in the Bureau of Automotive Repair. So it is a state program, but we help administer it at this level. So I hope that kind of clarifies. We don't do it through Rule 2202 though.
Right.
Right.
But the
So-
emission reduction credits that are purchased could come from
Yes.
that.
Could come from that, yeah.
Dr. Parker, we can present more fully on this matter at the next committee meeting, where we can describe the scrapping program and the EFMP and the distinctions between the two and how we actually administer them.
Oh, did we lose him?
I was like, I don't see him.
I think it'd be good to do a review of that.
There it is.
again.
Oh, did you hear us?
We haven't looked at it recently,
Yeah,
so
we can do that.
let's review that again.
Another technical difficulty. Always trying to make sure that you guys could hear me, and all of a sudden it went blank.
Uh-oh.
Anyway, we,
Dr. Parker, did you hear what I had said about, we can come back at the next committee meeting and present on the scrapping program and the EFMP program and how we administer and the state's role as well as our role.
I think that would be very helpful, because I think that, and what is equally as important, that we have people who are giving information out to the public, especially in some of these very sensitive areas, that is accurate as to exactly what programs that we know about or we even administer. Supervisor Kuehls, we may not be doing it here, but in fact it is being done, is that so that we can do things to help us to achieve our reductions, because the group that we were talking to was a trucking company talking about how they could use things. They had 12 trucks. They said they just willing to scrap them and get rid of them. They were all old diesel engines. I don't know, they may have sold them to someone else by now, but we could have had 12 trucks on the road.
Yeah, and I
They
think,
paid
Dr. Parker, that's where the misunderstanding came from. As soon as you said trucks, the scrapping program,
Well, no, they were pickup trucks.
oh, pickup trucks, okay. Never mind, we'll do the presentation.
It's back on again.
Yeah. And I'll give you a call as well,
They were big.
learn more.
Dr.
Okay.
Parker, I did have a question or a comment for Carol, because everything I know about this, I've learned from you over the years. And you asked, that you kind of put out there in the last slide that, maybe it's time to revisit this and restructure it, and there may be more cost-effective ways of doing it. My only comment would be, I would hope we would prioritize NOx emission reductions over some of the other pollutants. But I guess my question was, what are your thoughts in terms of what more cost-effective ways we could do this would work well with the employers and with us? Because, I really think you're in a better place to make that judgment than I am. Like I said, I've learned everything about this from you.
Okay.
So I'll have Carol tell me when I'm wrong, but one of the things.
That's what I do too, yeah.
So one of the things we're looking at is going forward with the ERCP, right?
Right.
There's money being spent by the facilities.
Right.
They have a travel coordinator, they're doing surveys, they're work putting these plans together. We have a very limited staff that has to review 600, 700 plans a year. And there's targets, but there's no real
Unfortunate
requirement
consequences, yeah.
that they meet their targets. Also given that, 5 years from now, with the light-duty fleet cleaning up dramatically, all that work's going to be for a very marginal amount of emission reduction. So per vehicle trip avoided, it's going to be much less emissions that you're avoiding. So we need to see how to make that part of the program more efficient, especially buried in the numbers that Carol showed, that when they pay the fee, we get a bonus, we get more emission reductions than we'd otherwise get. So we need to compare how much effort and resources are being put into these plans versus the actual where we can get maximize emission reductions, with an emphasis perhaps. I'm not saying we don't know where we're going to go yet. We have to work with the stakeholders, but it's going to be some diminishing returns that we would recognize.
Well, at least in Los Angeles County with the passage of Measure M and Measure R and all of that, we're getting better public transportation options. So that will be evolving too, and I would hope that, we have to do something about congestion. we can help do that through this program and
Yeah.
and use those new public transit opportunities to do it, then I would encourage us to do that too. I'm sure Mark's gonna chew my ear off about something about this program because he has 35 years of knowledge of it also. He can do that later.
Yeah, the benefits of ride sharing are obviously great. You know, you have the congestion issue and all kinds of other things, but we're just starting to see the emission reductions being a little more challenging. So we just need to make sure we're efficient and not having a lot of resources on our end or on the facility
Well,
ends going
like when
towards.
Judy and I went out to see R&R, it was like, should I drive? And I was like, well, you know, we can either go on my zero emission miles or your zero emission miles.
Okay, any further questions or comments from anyone? And any comments there from anyone in the audience? Public comment? Hearing none, thank you very much, Carol.
Thank you.
We will have the written reports. Anyone has any comments or questions on any of the written reports that are being presented by Dr. Fine? And item 4 and 5?
I'm here.
Hearing none, we'll just take those and for filing.
You're right, you're too on.
The other matters of businesses, Dr. Fine, before the committee that we haven't covered?
None here.
Okay, any public comment there at CC8?
No public comment.
None there, none here. Supervisor Ashley, any public comment where you are?
And none here.
Okay, well, then we'll adjourn our meeting and we'll see you at our next meeting on Friday, June 16th, 2017. Everyone have a nice weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.